everybody. I'm Carolyn Hadlock, and this is the Eunoia podcast. Eunoia is the Greek word for beautiful thinking, and that's what the show is all about. I interview beautiful thinkers who are creatives, founders, authors, and CEOs, and I try to get inside their heads. So I just talked to Kat Vellos. Her background is UX design, but she's also an author and an activist, and she just finished a book, We Should Get Together, where she is talking about helping people forge meaningful friendships and connections in a digital age. As I look at your career, you've kind of had two careers concurrently, one that's for-profit and one that's really as a volunteer, mentor / activist. And I'm just curious to hear you talk about why you have chosen to do your development that way, and then how the two worlds have informed your development as a designer, author, and activist.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show, Carolyn, and for that question, which isn't something I've been asked before. And, for me, most of my work and how I show up in the world is just an extension of who I am as a human being. And it's, of course, delightful when we can find expression for that in our jobs and careers. And sometimes when the companies that we may work for don't meet all of those needs, then I've looked elsewhere or created it myself or participated in the world in a different way. And so very early in my career as a graphic designer, I was really active in my community, really doing a lot of mobilization around equal rights, self-expression, LGBT rights, certainly the rights of artists and creators. And a lot of that was because that's what I cared about and wanted to introduce more justice into the world through fighting for the things that I cared about and taking a stand for those things. And activism doesn't always look like, having a demonstration. Mm-hmm. Anytime a person takes action in the world for a thing they care about, that is a form of activism.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean waving a picket sign all the time. Sometimes it's creating the thing that is missing from the world that you think should be there, or offering a resource to people who need something who aren't getting it from any other source.
Yeah.
And so that has been my approach to it. Over the years, I've created multiple different kinds of communities to meet different needs for people, or offered my services as a facilitator and organizer to help people find a sense of belonging or a sense of purpose. And it's taken a lot of different paths. I've done everything from being an AmeriCorps volunteer for 2 years, where I was creating literacy programs and math and reading programs, all the way up to more recently in the last 5 years, creating a community and professional development group for Black designers in the Bay Area who typically feel a great sense of isolation in the industry and didn't have a sense of belonging, and like myself, couldn't name 10 other Black designers. And so for me, it really just comes from seeing that something is not as right as it could be, and then taking action to make it more right, more beautiful, more available.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things with UX, I feel like a lot of people who don't really understand it think about it as sort of a technical skill versus what it really is, which is maybe the biggest skill of all of us in design, because you truly are creating paths and journeys and personas. And I would imagine there's a great need for empathy for people to really do a good job at your profession as a UX designer. So were there any specific instances that you can think of, or skill sets that maybe you got from doing all of your mentorship or volunteering work that you were able to sort of infuse into your daily work as a UX designer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of overlaps. And it always amuses me when people think that these are different fields, or that there's no crossover. They're like, oh, that's really different, and then this other thing's really unrelated to it. I'm like, no, there's actually the same, because you can't do either one of these types of works or actions in the world without having a skill set that applies in both scenarios. So for the first thing is caring. Do you give a crap? Are you noticing the things about you, and do you care about what is happening? And do you care about the people that are being affected affected by the way this is happening. That is as present in an activist frame of lens as it is in user experience design. It's like you have to care about what is happening for the other person and bring that sense of thoughtfulness and consideration and empathy into everything that you do. And from there, the next thing is intentionality. Nobody creates change in the world or a really effective user experience design if they're not being intentional and practiced in their thinking of like, does this make sense? How can this be better? And what are all the different ways or different paths that I can choose to try to make this better?
Yeah. From a mentoring perspective, I mean, you've been mentoring since 2006, starting with your time at PYE Global,
Mm-hmm.
where you worked with teens, and you were kind of what you were just saying. You were really helping them activate their full potential through creative writing and skill development. And I'm curious, what do you think is the sort of sweet spot to uh, get to somebody before they have felt that they're no longer creative and where they can really still be open and develop that creative persona?
Mm. What immediately came to mind when you asked that was the Pablo Picasso quote around, every child is an artist, and the problem is just to keep remembering that as they grow up into adulthood. Different things happen in our lives that leave that channel to creativity open or that close it off.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, one of the places where I see it getting closed off very often is in school, where, you know, when a child steps into a system that says, like, there is one right way to do this, and if you do it that right way, you get the A, and if you don't, well, too bad. Um, it creates a sense of constriction on creativity, and it creates very quickly a sense of like, well, some people do this well, so those are the only people that should do this. But like, to make an analogy, like, everybody can learn how to drive, and it's not like only like some people are allowed to drive because they're better drivers than the rest. It's like we assume that like if you're not good, you can practice and you'll get better at it,
Yeah.
and it's something that everybody can learn. And we don't do that with creativity and with art. And unfortunately, because of that, very quickly people get shut out if they're not, say, somebody who shows like a ton of very early natural talent. Like, every single person is creative, and just like any other skill, it is something that can be practiced and developed and expressed in multitude of ways. And we see that not just in the world of expressive arts like writing and drawing and dancing and music, but in the way that we create our lives. Like, that is a creative process. And in so many different kinds of work, an accountant is certainly very creative in ways that I don't have the same skill for, but I haven't practiced them the way an accountant has. And so being creative with how you cook a meal, or how you read a book to a child, or how you create a garden, or how you design a building, like, all of these things are a form of creativity. And it's unfortunate that our society has a really limited definition of what a quote unquote artist is and who gets to claim that as something they identify with, when really I believe it is something that is in everyone and that everyone can identify with.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting because you're either smart in school or you're creative, and those two
Yeah.
don't tend to live together. Because I agree, I don't think creativity is a talent. I think it's a mindset, and I do think it's a skill and it's a muscle. And everything you're
Mm-hmm.
saying is exactly how I feel about living your life creatively. And I'm wondering, so two questions. Maybe it's the same person, maybe it's not, but I'm always really interested in the people that influence the people that I talk with. And you obviously have a high sensitivity to the world, and you're very attuned to what's happening in the world and your role inside of that, as well as this kind of take no prisoners is too strong to say it, but is somebody who saying, hey, there's a need, there's a gap, and I'm going to fill it. I'm not going to wait. But where does that come from? Where do those two things come from? Is it a person or just something that happened in your life, or?
Mm. But I will say that in college and right after college was when I started to flex that muscle more of like, I see something that can be better, or I want to just create it, and I can, and that sense of power and agency and excitement and vitality that comes from that. And I would interestingly say, like, now that I think about who was there to kind of stoke that fire, um, and quite honestly, it was my best friend who I met the summer after I graduated college. Um, because we became roommates and we happened to meet when we were both at this phase of life where we were getting like super active about the world, super engaged, and just like so experimental and trying things. It was like we would read a book and like talk about it with each other and be like, I want to create something around this, or I want to do a gathering around this, or I want to like mobilize people around this. And we would just like be like, yeah, like we were on each other's team to be like, let's make it happen, no matter how wild the idea is. And I think having that creative encouragement and that sense of like we can literally do anything we want was what really fed that fire within me and cemented it as like this is a part of who I am. This is a part of how I feel the most alive.
Yeah. And I think, we talk about accountability partners for meeting our goals and getting things done. But I do think there's something to be said about also having that like champion, who can keep you going and believe in you. Because I think we all need that. I mean, I think we all have our own visions of how the world should go, but he sounds like a good friend.
Yeah, he is.
When you were at Slack or Pandora, just tell us a little bit about your job and what you did.
Yeah, so in chronological order, I'll go. I was at Pandora first, and there my role as a UX designer and product designer, it was probably about not exactly 50-50 research and design. It was probably more like 40-60 or 30-70. Um, as a designer on the team that was serving the listener audience, because there's
Mhm.
also a creator audience there, right, which are the musicians. Um, I was really focused on creating products and interactions across different platforms, whether that was on TV or app or desktop, the sign up experience, like all of these different things that can streamline that process for listeners. And a big part of that work was partnering with our head of research on multiple kinds of research and usability studies into how essentially the same things all UXers do, which is like trying to understand what people's goals are, how they're meeting those needs, what are the challenges they experience, and what are ways that we can make that easier and solve some of those problems for them. And then at Slack, my role was much more focused on the product design part of it, really focused on streamlining, again, all of the same things that are a part of UX design that blend into product design. It was much more UI based at Slack, but
Mhm.
also like really overlaid with the UX. Like everybody on the design team has that blend of skills. And so really designing like beautiful interfaces that increase the user's success and feeling of like trust and safety and transparency around what is happening to them at any particular part of their journey, whether that journey is learning about a plan and understanding what the difference between them are, or whether it's communicating with the rest of their team's users when something has changed in the features that are available to them based on a plan change, or paying their bill and understanding that in clearer and more transparent ways. Like, so I was really doing a lot of work there on that.
Yeah, and you guys, I feel like Slack. There's something about being in that ecosystem that fosters a sense of intimacy that
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel in some of the other platforms. So you did a good job there.
Thank you. I will say for sure that working there also created that sense of intimacy and access and closeness in communication. Like, it's a massive company, thousands of people there, and it felt so comfortable and easy to just message anybody and to reach out to them. And there's a sense of like informality that I think Slack brings. It's a real strength, and so it has that opportunity to like invite people to show up and just reach out to each other and connect.
Oh, I love
And I
that.
really love it as a tool. Mhm.
Well, and so now I'd love to just shift gears a little bit towards the book that you wrote and the work that you're doing today, and really interested in hearing, the book We Should Get Together talks a lot about friendships, forming friendships in this sort of connected age. So I'd love to hear you talk about that and sort of what was the impetus for doing that, but then also what is the sort of overlay of community and relationships inside a professional context, but also outside in a more friendship.
Yeah. So I wrote this book. I was working on it off and on over the last 5 years, and partially just based on my own fascination with the subject matter of adult friendship. I've moved around a lot. I lived in Florida, I lived in Seattle, I lived in Hawaii, I lived in the Bay Area, and I love the Bay Area a lot. And interestingly, when I moved here, though, although I felt more at home here than anywhere else I've ever lived, one of the things that was uniquely perplexing was that despite meeting really cool, wonderful people all the time, I was having a hard time establishing like a regular friend group. And so I started talking to people about it, and other adults that I met here, like acquaintances, would tell me that they also had the same problem, and they were like, oh, I thought it was just me, or maybe I'm not trying hard enough. And repeatedly, over and over again, this problem kept coming up, and people would share with me about it. And as a UX designer, I can't help but feel an impetus to take action when I see that people are having a difficulty achieving a certain goal. Um, and so to me, it was just like any other user experience problem that can be researched and designed for. And so I spent some time really researching into the topic of connection and belonging, and what makes for, like, when you look at the nitty gritty of like what are the ingredients of a really healthy, thriving friendship. And as a facilitator who cannot stop herself sometimes, I also created an event called Better Than Small Talk, which I ran for a few years during those first early days of like curiosity into the subject. And it was really around helping people create more meaningful connection by like not just talking about small talk, which, you go to a dinner party and it's often like the same four questions. It's like, oh, where
Mm-hmm.
do you work? Where do you go to school? Where are you from? And I hate small talk with a passion.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
so I just wanted it to be a place where people actually could get into more meaningful conversation, because that is where we start to have that, neural mirroring and like the real sense of connection with another person. And so while I was doing that, I was writing a lot, researching a lot, and ultimately I had just got to a place where I had so much content. I was like, this is way longer than a blog. This is way longer than like, any other format I can think of sharing it. And so a book was the format that needed to take. So being a designer who has, worked in publishing before and knew how to do layout and typography of myself, I was like, of course I want to create that and own that part of the process. So um, one of the things, when you create a book or when you create anything and put it in the world, you don't know what will happen or how people will receive it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really beautiful about this was that when I put it out into the world, it resonated right away. And that was what I saw. I was like, people need this. Like they're struggling and they don't know what to do about it. And this is the best that I can do to offer in that moment of like, here's a tool or a resource that looks at the four biggest problems adults face when trying to form adult friendship. And here's a whole bunch of strategies that you can try to address that, to fix that problem. And so I just got so many, such a wave of positive reception and people saying, like, we need this, we want your work. Will you come and do a speaking gig, or will you come and teach a workshop, or can we do some like coaching with you? Like, there were so many kinds of requests. Ultimately, I had to make the decision of like, am I going to keep my job at Slack, or am I going to say yes to this work that is like clearly pulling me into the world in a different way, and that there's a great demand for, and that it feels so connected to like my life's mission and like what matters to me so deeply in my heart, and so I said yes to that, and so that was why I left Slack in February and have been working on this full time. And I'm so grateful every day, Carolyn, for the work I get to do.
As you talk about forming adult friendships, do you think that is a similar thing that's happening inside the workplace as well, with people trying to form connections and communities?
So work is one of the places where adults typically find their friendships because you have access to a reliable group of people on a consistent basis, which is one of the things you need to foster a friendship. And a lot of the people that I interviewed, over those 5 years, I interviewed people like across the country in so many different kinds of settings. They described how it's difficult to establish those friendships because it's so hard to make plans or everyone's so busy and like, it takes so much effort to meet up face to face. And work is one of the cool places where like you can show up and if you like these people, you can become friends with them.
Yeah.
And with that said, like a lot of people change jobs very quickly, especially out here. Most people stay at a job for a year or two and then they move on, if that. And so with that, sometimes comes like the disillusion of those connections because people don't always keep in touch beyond the condition that brought them together.
Hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I think about a lot lately and that I talk to um, folks who lead teams about is the same qualities that lead to a healthy friendship are often replicated in a healthy colleague relationship.
Yeah.
So a sense of feeling truly seen and truly heard. Companies are spending so many thousands of dollars on creating belonging programs because belonging directly impacts like employee retention, that directly impacts how much money the company has to spend on turnover and rehiring and retraining.
Yeah. Which is expensive.
It is millions of dollars of money goes into that. And so if they can actually create healthy colleague relationships where people do feel really seen and known and heard, and there is a high degree of trust and collaboration, then they will have not just better outcomes in the products and services they're creating, but they will be saving millions of dollars on not having to rehire and retrain people every 9 months.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I hope that you can influence as many places as you can get yourself in. I did want to talk to you about, you talked about this in the beginning, that you founded the Bay Area Black Designers in 2015. And it's something that, I'm in an advertising agency, and it's something that we see a complete gap and lack of. And I think everybody's focused on diversity and inclusion across the board, but at the same time, it does seem like there is a chasm in Black people entering in design and advertising, which I know is part of why you started this group. But what do you think? Why do you think that is?
Well, I can just reflect on my own experience, which is to say that when I was in college and design school and whatnot, like I didn't see a single Black designer in any of the texts, in any of the examples of who was a designer. And I was really lucky that in high school, I had an art teacher who, when looking at the things I was putting in my sketchbook, she said to me, she's like, "You would be a really good designer, Kat." And it was her really seeing that ability in me and then encouraging that because, like, I didn't have any exposure to certainly anybody who looked like me who was doing this job I hadn't heard of. I didn't know what it was. And she was like, "Look into graphic design." And she was totally right, you know?
Yeah.
um, and over many, many years, I didn't meet any other Black designers. And when I looked at my design, heroes through like, graphic design and visual design, there were not that many Black people. And it's been echoed in the stories that a lot of the members of the group have told me about what it was like for them to get into design as a career and then to feel that sense of isolation and to have that layered on in their work experience of like, work is hard enough, but when like you're representing like what feels like you're the only one, and
Yeah.
for many of us,
That's a
we've
lot
been
of
the
pressure.
only
Yeah.
one in the room, and it is a lot of pressure. And so, one of the many things that the group has given people is that sense of like normalcy and belonging, and being able to walk in a room with 25 or 50 other Black people who also care about design and practice your craft, like, is such an amazing feeling that most of us like had never had any other experience in our life. We went from a group of 5 people on my living room floor, because that's as many as I knew when I started, to now we have like over 400 members across
Wow.
the Bay Area. And, I joke, but not joke when I say that I'm running the Bay Area's largest employee resource group for Black designers, because that's exactly what it is. And many of these companies don't have an employee resource group for marginalized folks. And so, um, that is my spiel on that, and why it matters, and why it actually we need more visibility, so that young Black people today who want to get into design can look at us and say like, oh, they made it. I can probably do that too.
Yeah. Okay. Last area is obviously we're in a pandemic. I think you're probably super needed right now and probably super helpful and a really rich resource for a lot of people. What are you seeing for people right now who are they feeling disconnected? Are they, I mean, we're all working remotely and trying to find a new normal in that, but has it introduced a whole new like layer that you hadn't even thought about before?
Yeah, so right now is, a very, very unusual time. Obviously, our lives are disrupted, routines are disrupted, and we need to keep our distance for a good cause. And I'm seeing two trends really strongly in the people who are coming to my workshops and groups and coaching is like folks who are either feeling over connected at a very draining kind of quality. So like spending all week, all day and all night on Zoom, but then
Mm-hmm.
still somehow feeling emotionally disconnected, which like is like this weird cognitive dysfunction. You're like, what? Like the record scratch? Because you're just like, wait, I just spent all this time with all these people. Why do I still feel emotionally disconnected and
Yeah.
exhausted? Particularly if you have to spend all day on Zoom and then every social interaction you have is also on a video chat. It's like that's just going to get exhausting. We were already at needing digital detox retreats before this started, and now it's like to the max.
Yeah,
And the
that's
other,
interesting.
and the other thing that is happening, and that I'm really concerned about as well, is like there are a lot of folks who like actually aren't feeling that virtually connected. They're wondering how other people are getting invites to like happy hours. They're eating dinner together with other people, or they're not. They're wishing that they had a regular crew of people, or even a regular person or two
Yeah.
to check in with. The loneliness epidemic was already at scary heights before this started, which is part of the reason I wrote my book, We Should Get Together. And to some extent, like there are still a swath of people who are not getting their connection needs met during this pandemic. And I really have a deep heart for that because with the first issue, it's like just a matter of tweaking, like, well, what does real connection look like and how can you tweak what's happening in your life so that you get more of that meaningful connection and less of the draining, like tiny bites of, oh, I saw people, therefore I'm connected, aka
Mm-hmm.
not true. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm really focusing on those two aspects and providing resources and support to make adjustments where necessary in both of those cases. And this was true before as it is now in pandemic, is that connection isn't the number of people you know, it's the depth and quality of the connections that you have. And that is something that I think is really important to keep top of mind when people, especially right now, are thinking about how to feel less anxious and more meaningfully connected, is to focus on cultivating experiences of real depth rather than just feeling like you need to be in touch with as many people as possible.
Well, I'm glad that they have you as a resource. I think that you're going to help a lot of people. So I think you should feel really good about making that decision. You had no idea at the when you left Slack of what was coming,
Mm-mm.
but you must have been prescient because here you are and you're able to devote yourself fully to this, which is awesome. Okay, last question. I always ask everybody I talk to, what is, since eunoia means beautiful thinking in Greek, what is
Mm-hmm.
your definition? How would you define what beautiful thinking is?
Beautiful thinking is thinking that connects the heart, the mind, and the spirit at the same time.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Kat. This has been delightful. I appreciate it, and good luck to you as you move out into really making this your full time um, gig. And I wish you all kinds of luck. And I'm definitely in your corner as a cheerleader. So I appreciate the
Thank
time,
you.
and I think that's it for today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Carolyn. You too. Talk soon.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. And I hope you took something from it. Something that'll help you with your next meeting, next pitch, your next big project. But above all, I hope it inspires you to think strange, different, new, and beautiful thoughts. For more from this interview and other chats with beautiful thinkers, visit CarolynHadlock.com to subscribe on Medium and follow @Eunoia Quarterly on Instagram. That's EUNOIA Quarterly.